Okay, so I am going to show you how simple it is to make yeast bread. This is one of the most basic recipes out there. It always starts with the core ingredients of yeast, bread flour, sugar, salt, liquid. In this case, we're going to use vegetable oil, and we combine all these into the simple recipe. So the reason I chose this recipe in particular to demonstrate is because most of these items are readily available. You don't have to worry about anything like milk or eggs or anything like that coming into it. So everything here is shelf stable except for the yeast, which once you open your jar of yeast, you want to store that in the fridge. But when you do that, it's good for 6 months. So the ingredients we have here today are the equivalent of 1 package of active dry yeast, which is 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast, 2 1/4 cups of warm water. When you pour this, you can absolutely use your faucet as long as it's not scalding hot. If it's still warm enough to the touch, it's warm enough to dissolve your yeast into and activate your yeast. You need 3 tablespoons of sugar plus 1/2 teaspoon to go into your yeast activation bowl. You need a teaspoon of salt, your 2 tablespoons of oil, and a 6 1/4 to 6 3/4 cups flour. So I put the extra 1/2 cup in here. What happens is when you start mixing, you're going to have to adjust based on how your dough is turning out, how much flour you include. So we will start off by dissolving our yeast. So what we're going to start off with here is activating our yeast. So we're going to take the equivalent of our 1 package of active dry yeast. We're going to put it into our warm water. We're going to use a spatula and go ahead and make sure we get all that included in there. And you want to actually dissolve this in your warm water. And at this point, you need the extra 1/2 teaspoon of sugar that you put into your mixture to activate with the yeast, because the sugar plays into the activation as well. So we're going to sit here, we're going to stir this up. And this is an important step because when this starts to bubble, you'll know your yeast is actually still alive and good and is going to be able to provide your leavening for your bread. So we're going to get this going here, and then we'll let that sit while we start the actual dough portion. So your dough portion, you can either do this by hand or you can use an electric mixer. I'm actually going to demonstrate the electric mixer part because it's easier, but none of this is difficult to do by hand either. You just take a little bit more time. So what you do when you start to turn your mixture into bread is you go ahead and take 3 cups of your flour. So that's about a little less than half your flour. And go ahead and put that in the bowl. You don't have to be too exact here. You're just like cutting the flour in half so you can slowly add it as you build on in your recipe. So you just don't want to overwhelm the mixture all at once and mix everything all at one time, because then it won't come together smoothly. Now we're going to put in the rest of our sugar, our salt, get all that in there. And then we're going to go ahead and mix that up. I just have the dough hook here on the mixer. It's not a really big deal. You can start with the mixer hook too. You basically just want to start blending your ingredients and making them start to come together. So we're going to mix that up. And we're looking over here at our yeast mixture, which is starting to show some bubbles. That means it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's alive. And then we're going to go ahead and add our oil into our yeast mixture and then mix that up. So this is now going to go into the beginnings of our dough. So right now we only have dry ingredients in the mixture. So this is going to be the first liquids that we add. And we're going to very slowly pour this in. And then we're going to go ahead and create the dough. So you want to go ahead and keep this at the stir level until it starts to come together, because you don't want to go too fast and have your flour flying all over the place, or try to pour your ingredients too fast. And then once your liquid starts to come together, you want to keep a spatula handy so you can scrape down the sides of the bowl and incorporate everything that's going on in your mixture. So you can see there's going to be flour built up on the side, and you want to go ahead and keep working that into your dough. We're just continuing to incorporate those first 3 cups of flour. All the dry flour gets off the side of the bowl and gets incorporated into our mixture here. So for the next step, we just slowly start to incorporate the rest of our flour, 1/2 cup at a time. I actually have it broken up by quarters just so you can keep an eye on it. So what you do is you just slowly, slowly, slowly continue to add your flour. And once that's incorporated, you add more. And this is why in this step it was important to take out the extra half cup of flour and not add that, because you may not even need it. And you don't want to overly incorporate too much flour into your mixture and make your dough too dry and stiff. Your dough should start to ball up around your dough hook and build together in the center of the bowl as the flour is incorporated. It's going to pull off the sides of the bowl and start centering on the dough hook. So once the dough really starts to cling to the center of the dough hook, the kneading process has now begun. And you need at least 8 to 10 minutes of solid kneading for your dough to be ready to go. Your bowl should start being clean on the sides. Everything should be incorporated into the dough. There shouldn't be any flour left in your bowl. It should be clinging all to the center of the dough hook and coming cleanly off the sides. And again, when you're doing the kneading, it's best to set a timer and make sure you give the dough enough kneading time as you push through. But this looks like we're pretty close, so we're gonna go ahead and stop here with the mixing. So what we do next is go ahead and lightly grease your bowl with the same oil I used in the mixture. Go ahead and put a little bit in your bowl, and then you just spread it around. So you have a nice lightly greased bowl here. And then you are going to go ahead and move your dough ball into this bowl. And this is because we're moving into the stage known as proofing. So proofing is when, or the rise, whichever you want to call it, it's called both things depending on who you talk to. You want your dough to double in size. So what we're going to do right now is create a very warm environment for this dough to rise in. I have a colder kitchen, so this is something to be aware of. You need to have a warm, moist place for the dough to set up and be ready to go. So we're going to go ahead and use a damp cloth on the top of this so it doesn't get dry on the top as it rises. And go ahead and wet down a clean cloth. Just damp, it doesn't have to be like soaked or anything like that. And then when you do that, you put that over the top of your dough. And what I'm doing is microwaving the water, so everything in the microwave will be warm, and then I'll just turn it off and I'll let it sit for the rise period in the microwave. And that way it'll stay nice and warm and moist and not have any issues. So for this particular recipe, they want you to let it rise for 1.5 to 2 hours. So what you do is you just put it in there, you set a timer, you check it. At the 1.5 hour mark, if it hasn't doubled in size, give it a little more time. Again, this can depend on the humidity in your kitchen and how warm or cold the area is. So give the dough the time it needs to double in size. And that way you will get some nice loaves out of this. All right, got a nice humid environment going on in there. Go ahead and put your dough in and leave it alone for the next 1.5 to 2 hours. Okay. Now the dough has been rising in the warmed microwave for 1.5 hours approximately. Again, you just need to keep an eye on it, make sure it's doubled in size. So we're gonna go ahead and take it out. You want to prepare a work surface. It doesn't have to be a silicone mat like this. You can also just sanitize your countertop. But what you want to do is create a lightly floured surface in order to make your bread loaves. So you want to scatter a little flour around on this. You're going to go ahead and take your dough out. I'm gonna punch it down, and then we're gonna roll it out onto here. Now we want 2 loaves. That's the yield of most recipes. So we're gonna go ahead and cut this in half and cut it into 2 fairly equal pieces. At that point, you set one to the side, and then you just want to go ahead and roll it out into a nice rectangular shape. You don't have to roll really hard. Yeast dough works a little differently than quick breads or cookies or anything like that. It's more stretchy than anything else, but you just want to be able to form a really nice loaf shape. So you just want to make a rectangle, and then you literally are just going to roll it and tuck the ends under and pinch and tuck and make a nice loaf shape. You don't really have to make this perfect because it's going to rise in the pan, and that is going to make your actual loaf shape turn out. So do the same thing you did before with the bowl. Put a little oil in there, spread it all around, and then you want to put your loaf shape, get a little oil on the top, and then flip it around, and then we'll put it back to rise. So now we're going to do the same thing with the other item, the other half of the dough. Put a little bit more flour down and go ahead and roll out your rectangle and make another loaf. The only reason for a rectangle is you want your loaf to be a little bit longer than it is wide, and so when you tuck everything under, it'll be fairly even and nice. So do the same thing. Grease up the pan. Make sure you get the bottom and sides. You don't want your loaf to stick while it's cooking, because this is actually what it's going to cook in. And then you go ahead and roll, pinch, and tuck, and make a nice loaf. Again, roll it on both sides so you get oil all the way around. And then those are ready to go. So now we're going to reheat up our water. Still sitting in there. Give it a couple minutes. And then we will go ahead and set these to rise for another hour and a half. So the reason why there's 2 proofs or 2 rises with dough is it changes how you need to form the dough. So the first one just gives the volume to your dough, and the second one you actually form it into your shape. So it's going to rise in the shape that you want to bake it in. So that's why we formed these into loaves. Now we're going ahead, we reheated up our water, and we're going to go ahead and put these loaves in to rise. Did the same thing because my kitchen's a little bit cold. I just went ahead, put them in there, and now I'm going to go ahead and put a nice fresh wet cloth on them so they stay nice and moist. And we'll give them another hour and a half to rise. Again, you want the double in size. If it takes it a little longer, really not a big deal. You just want them to go ahead and get to that double the volume. Okay, so you want to preheat your oven to 375 to prepare to bake your loaves, and then you're going to want to check on them and make sure they've actually doubled in size. So that's what we're going to do right now. And they look very good. Carefully take them out from underneath the cloth. All ready to go, all nicely doubled. So we can get rid of our water now because we don't need that anymore. The microwave, they are ready to go. They have doubled in size. Put them in. Again, that was about an hour and a half. You can also do that second rising in the fridge overnight, as if you do all this prep the night before and you want fresh bread in the morning, you can go ahead and pull them out when you wake up and put them in the oven and just do the baking part. So now we're waiting for the oven to heat up to 375 degrees to go ahead and bake these. And what you need to remember as they bake is just kind of keep an eye on the smell. You can tell and the structure of the loaf, but there's 2 ways you can check the doneness. You can either check with an internal thermometer. If it's reached 200 degrees, the bread is done. Or you can do the timer, watch the smell, and then when they come out, we're going to put them on the baking rack. And when you take them out of the pan, you should be able to knock on the bottom. They should sound hollow. That means that all the dough is cooked and they are done. That comes from the buoyancy you've created using the carbon dioxide that the yeast created inside of the loaves. So that is it for now. We're going to go ahead and bake these up. They're going to bake for 30 minutes as soon as our oven gets warm. Okay, we are now complete with our baking and we're going to take our bread out of the oven. This is what it looks like. All nice and done. All right, and then all you need to do to get it out on the rack is go ahead and just run a butter knife around the edges to make sure you don't have any sticky points here. All right, and then we just want to go ahead and get these out of the pan so they can finish cooling over here on the rack. This is what your bread should look like. And that's it. Let it cool for about 20-30 minutes and they'll feel free to slice into it and make whatever you want. Sandwich, toast, all good. That's it.